YouTube, there seems to be a debate going on constantly online as far as NBA dialogue goes, and that is, who is the greatest point guard of all time? Is it Magic Johnson or is it Stephen Curry? Basically, from what I can see, there are two groups that are split in this debate, and they both come from two very different generations, typically, and they both have two very different conclusions on the subject, and they will let you know about it. And whether you think Steph or Magic is the GOAT point guard, I think we can all agree these are the only two players in the discussion, all right? I don't think there's any Isaiah Thomas advocates out there. The goal of this video for me is not to impose my opinion on who is the GOAT point guard, because I don't have a strong side that I take in this debate. I don't even really have a personal preference to either player. I like them both. I'm a fan of both of them. And because I think this debate is so even as far as their cases go, it's really difficult to even take a definitive stance on it for me personally. So again, the goal of this video is not to take a definitive stance or to impose my side of this debate, because truly I don't really have one. The objective of this video is simply to give a lot of context to both of their cases and demonstrate how close of a margin it is between their two cases. And through all of that, the objective is to have everyone form their own conclusion of this debate. So I'm not trying to make you go to one side or the other. I'm just trying to lay out all the context available, give my unbiased analysis of it, and have you, the viewer, come away with any conclusion you want, having all of the information available. But one of the reasons I'm making this video, other than everything I've said, is because I do find it really interesting, okay? As an NBA superfan, the greatest point guard of all time debate is very interesting to me, and I just think maybe I could provide a little bit more of a different analysis than what's on the internet so far. So without further ado, Steph Curry or Magic Johnson, who is the GOAT point guard? Let's get right into it. So I'm going to be breaking this video down into specific sections so I can more concisely paint the entire picture of Steph and Magic's careers and, their cases in particular. But before we get into the criteria and the specific sections of the video, I just want to explain what I think is a narrative that I don't necessarily find important for this discussion that people have all the time. And that is that there's a specific skill set that requires a player to be categorized as an NBA point guard, right? And people say, well, Steph Curry isn't really, a true point guard, right? A floor general. So he can't even really be in this discussion. I think that's nonsense. The way I look at it is that, like, Stephen Curry plays the position of point guard, okay? And so it has nothing to do with what a point guard traditionally means or anything like that. It's just basically these two guys have both played point guard for their entire career. Which one has a better case for the better career? Like, that's kind of just what it is. And so Steph is a point guard, and we can put that away. And with that out of the way, let's get into the criteria, and then we'll dive straight into all the sections. The criteria and specific sections of the video that I'm going to be, splitting it up into to gain more context and hopefully paint the full picture of these guys' careers will be resume. So that will include, their career accolades, all their numbers, statistics. It will also include their peak and longevity. So resume will be the number one category we go into right after this. Then we're going to be jumping into impact on winning. Okay. And what I mean by that is specifically from an individual player perspective, what is the level that Stephen Curry and Magic Johnson impacted winning on the highest level for their team specifically? This is a very good indicator on how great a player, all time should be ranked, in my opinion. It's hard to kind of gauge sometimes, but you play to win. And so those are the two categories so far: resume, impact on winning. And then we're going to have individual abilities like, shooting, shot creation, passing, playmaking, rebounding, defense. Like, whoever has the better abilities and has a better skill set that is more reflective of a winning player, this has to factor into a greatness and ranking, all-time conversation. And then level of competition faced. Like, this is one of the more important factors as well. It goes kind of hand in hand with impact on winning, but this is very, very important. This has to be factored in. I mean, you can win 40 championships if you play against a JV high school team, but if you're going to be labeled as the best of all time, you have to beat the best, in my opinion. So this is important. And so those are the categories. Let's get started on this analysis. Please bear with me, folks. This is important stuff that I'm having to explain. Otherwise, the video won't make sense. This is also why we put chapters in the video. Now we can accurately sift through the greatness that is both Steph Curry and Magic Johnson, and maybe at the end of the video come to a conclusion on which one is the GOAT point guard. Let's get right into the resume category of this discussion. So before we get into all of the fine-tuned details of this conversation, we have to look at just the basics and the major career accomplishments of Steph Curry and Magic Johnson, okay? We're looking at things like championships, career statistics, all NBA teams, all-star selection, things like this, right? And so obviously Magic Johnson has won 5 NBA titles in his career. This is one of the more important things when you're ranking players all time. Steph Curry has won 4. And so without context, you see that and you say, well, Magic Johnson's a better winner, right? But it doesn't always work like that, as everyone knows. There are more things that factor factor into it. In my personal opinion, if you were the best player on your championship team, factors in maybe the most of these rankings discussions. A good way to measure that is by, counting their finals MVPs, right? Where Magic has 3 finals MVPs out of his 5 championships. Steph Curry has 1, but I think it's clear and obvious that Steph Curry was at least, at minimum, the best player on 2 of his championship teams. While he might not have won finals MVP in 2015, that was Andre Iguodala, but honestly, are we really going to say that Steph wasn't the best player on that team? Come on. So at minimum, for 2 of Steph Curry's finals, 4 finals, we could say that he was the best player on 2 of those teams, while Magic, clearly at least 3 by winning 3 finals MVPs. At the time of recording this video, Steph Curry can still add to his resume, which is a good advantage for him, I would say. And it's actually crazy, both of these guys have 10 All-NBA selections. So I think that's, clearly something that they're very evenly matched upon. But as I said before, I think Steph, could potentially add a couple more to those All-NBA selections as the years progress. He's only 36 years old. I say only 36 years old. That's crazy to say now, but Steph, playing at the elite level that he still is, clearly has an opportunity to at least make it 11 or 12, right? I think we could say that safely. And so while they're evenly matched here, obviously Steph's career is an incomplete body of work at the end of the day. So we are just looking at things right now, and so they're evenly matched there. 10 All-NBA selections. Steph Curry is a 10-time All-Star. Magic Johnson is a 12-time All-Star. However, one of those All-Star selections came in a 1991-92 season where he didn't even play a single game. And so, that one doesn't really count. And so let's just call that, a slight advantage to Magic Johnson. Although again, I do think Steph will have 11 or 12 by the time he retires. So we could just say even in this regard, okay? Steph Curry does have something over Magic Johnson though, and that is Steph Curry is a 2-time scoring champion in the NBA, most points per game in the regular season. This is obviously a advantage over Magic, who has 0 scoring titles to his name, but I will say Magic Johnson does have 4 years of assist titles to his name, so that is an obvious advantage there. So it's clear to say that Steph Curry and Magic Johnson are very different types of players, and that's why having 2 extra assist titles or having 2 scoring titles gives one the advantage over the other, because Magic Johnson just wasn't a top tier scorer in the league. That was never his thing, so you can't really fault him for not winning scoring titles. You can't really fault Steph for not winning assist titles. They just played very different types of games, and so I think you have to give it a wash in that regard. Steph Curry is a 2-time league MVP for the regular season. Magic Johnson is a 3-time league MVP, and so I think that is an advantage there, clearly, no question. I'm not going to count things like All-Star Game MVP. I don't really think that's relevant to this conversation. They're both members of the NBA 75th anniversary team. Again, I don't know that that's super relevant. So those are, most of the career accolades, right? Now we can talk about like longevity and peaks, okay? And so for the longevity category, I have to give it to Steph Curry, but the problem for Magic Johnson is his career was cut short due to, the off-the-court illness that he had. And so I don't know that it's fair to really judge Magic Johnson on his longevity, but I do think for this video, if we're just laying out all the facts and taking our fairness out of it, right? Like we're just looking at it like a computer would and saying who's the GOAT, you obviously have to give Steph the edge in longevity. I mean, Magic Johnson could be the NBA GOAT if he never, had the off-the-court illness and it played more seasons. He had to retire at only basically 31 years old, and he was already a 5-time champion. He was still in his prime basically when he retired. And so it's really difficult to say longevity is his shortcoming, but you have to if you're just looking at things objectively. So Steph takes the longevity, no question, when we're just gauging these two people's careers. Steph has been objectively great for at least, at least a decade straight at this point. It's 2024. He really broke on the scene in like 2013. He was good before that, but he wasn't great before that, in my opinion. And so I think you have to say, Steph takes the longevity. He's also still going, and I think he'll, play somewhere close to 40 years old. And at the pace he's going at, I mean, he's still a top 10 player in the league. And so, the longevity goes to Steph, no question for me. I mean, he's been great for longer than Magic was great as far as period of times go. But, let's talk about peaks, right? Because while Magic might not have the best longevity due to unfortunate circumstances, he did have a very, very dominant all-time peak. But so does Steph Curry. If we look at Steph Curry's career from the 2013-14 season to the 2021-2022 season, this, in my opinion, is Steph Curry's peak. I mean, you could make a case for maybe some other years, you could add to that or subtract from that. You could say he's still in his prime. I just don't really see it like that. But I'm just going to make the case. 2014 to 2022, Steph Curry won 4 championships. He won 2 MVPs. He won a finals MVP, 2 scoring titles. He averaged 27 points per game in the regular season. Obviously, Steph being the greatest shooter of all time, this is his biggest window, in my opinion. 10 3-point attempts per game on 42% from the 3-point line is all-time great. Obviously, the best of all time, basically. His efficiency was off the charts, basically almost a 50-40-90 8-year period. we could say offensively, efficiency-wise, he had some of the best seasons of all time during this stretch. This is one of the most dominant NBA peaks in history, okay? He also made 6 finals, while him and the Warriors only won 4. He did make 6, all right? And so that has to count for something. Clearly, making the finals and losing is better than making the second round or the first round and losing. He was an all-star almost every season out of this period. The only season he wasn't an all-star was when he played 5 games in 2020 with the injury, okay? And so his, numbers during the playoffs in this time were about just as great. As I mentioned, won 4 championships. He won a finals MVP. He averaged 27 points per game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 1.6 steals. By the way, I forgot to mention Magic Johnson and Steph Curry both have at least one steal champion title, which means leading the league in steals per game. Magic has 2, Steph has 1. I should have mentioned that before, but Steph Curry did in the playoffs. Again, 4 championships from 2014 to 2022, 1 finals MVP, 45% from the field, almost 11 attempts from 3-point range on 40%, 89% from the line on 5 attempts per game. These numbers are all-time great for any player, like during a stretch of time. As far as playoff consistency goes, again, 4 championships. Like, this is a dominant all-time peak. I don't care what anyone says. This peak is ridiculous. You could say he's even still in his peak. I don't know if I would agree with that, but another thing is Steph during this time basically was seen to be a top 3 player at minimum throughout this entire time. I mean, you could maybe say in 2013-14 he wasn't quite seen like that back then, but I think you could say that he definitely was. If you want to be really uncharitable to it and say top 5 for all this time, you could. So I think that factors in for me as well. Like, if your peak, you were, a top 5 or top 3 player in the world for almost 10-year stretch, that is a legendary peak. And I think even at one time people were saying he was the best player in the world. I don't know that I ever think Steph was the best player in the world, but no question this is, one of the greatest peaks of any player in NBA history, not just point guards. Now let's go to Magic Johnson's peak and compare. You could realistically say from 1980 to 1991, Magic Johnson was in his peak, so that is a long time to be in an NBA peak. During this time, Magic Johnson won 5 NBA championships, 3 NBA finals MVPs, 3 NBA MVPs. This was basically his whole career. He came back in 96, and played 32 games of regular season, but it's hard to really count that. Basically from 1979, 1980 season to 90-91 season, Magic Johnson made 9 finals, so 9 finals appearances, won 5 of them, 3 of them he was the MVP for. And if you want to say that he was the second best player on his team for 2 of them, I mean, you could say that, but still, it was a very thin margin that he was the second best player. So the peak conversation is very interesting. I mean, during the regular season, throughout this period of time, obviously this is a longer period of time than I think you could make for Steph Curry. Even if you want to say, I think it's pretty close. I think it's pretty similar. It's like a decade for Magic. You could even, if you wanted to stretch it until now for Steph Curry, you could say it's a decade and be charitable. But either way, these are both super long peaks, right? In the regular season during this time, Magic averaged 20 points per game, 11 assists, 7 rebounds, 2 steals per game on 52% from the field, 29% from 3, only 1 attempt per game. He was not, he wasn't a 3-point shooter, 84% from the line on 6 attempts per game. Like, these are, when you factor in all the winning, I mean, it's like all-time great peak as well. And to make 9 finals, basically, again, I could be wrong about the 9 finals. Let's just say it's 8 or 9. I know it's at least 8. To make 8 or 9 finals, win 5 of them within a 10-year stretch, like that is basically top 5, like, winning peak, right? To do all of this is basically Magic's whole career, like I said, in 10 seasons. I think I'd probably give Magic Johnson the slight edge as far as peaks go, but it's only by a very small margin. I think longevity and peak, you have to give to Steph. Peak, you might have to give Magic the slight edge. Now, people are going to say, well, he only scored 20 points per game, but like 20 points per game from 80 to 90 is a lot different, I would say, than 20 points per game now. So it's a little bit deflated. I think it would probably translate to maybe, like, if I had to guess, like 21, 22, 23 points per game now. Even just saying that, right? Like 20 points and 11 assists and 2 steals per game on good efficiency with 5 NBA titles, leading your team to 3 finals and, maybe being second on the team for 2 of them. Like, during a 10-year stretch, I just think that's all-time great. Despite the lower scoring numbers to some of the other legends, and Steph Curry in particular, Steph Curry's obviously the better scorer. Magic, you could say offensively, as far as complete games go, Steph Curry might be the more complete player, but Magic Johnson, as far as what he's good at and great at, like, he's the best all time at what he's great at, which is transition playmaking and playmaking in general. You could say he's probably the best playmaker of all time, no question. I think that's pretty safe to say. 11 assists per game for 10 years is wild. It's almost as crazy as 27 points per game for 10 years. But during the playoffs, I mean, throughout this period of time, if you look at Magic's numbers, it was 20 points per game, 12 and a half assists, 2 steals, Finals, 8 rebounds, 50% from the field, again, 23% from 3. He wasn't a 3-point shooter, wasn't really a part of his game, and 84% from the line on 7 free throw attempts per game. Like, this is a crazy 10-year stretch of playoffs. I mean, even for 3 of these seasons, he averaged 10 rebounds per game. In 1981, he averaged 14 rebounds per game. Like, these numbers are outrageous. In 1985, he averaged 18 points per game and 15 assists. In 86, he averaged 22 points per game and 15 assists. Like, that's wild to me. In his rookie season, he won the NBA Finals while Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was hurt. In Game 6 of the Finals, he had 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, and a block on 60% from the field, like as a rookie. So I just think the peak is a little bit better for Magic, but the longevity is better for Steph, which will conclude the resume section for the video. We might give the slight edge to Magic Johnson, but again, Steph Curry's resume is still being built. But at this point in time, if Steph Curry wins another Finals, I think he puts this whole discussion to bed anyway. But as for right now, I think that's where it is. Now moving on to the impact on winning section, let's get into it. So as far as impact on winning goes, you know, one of the things I have to note for both of these players is you could say Steph Curry has played on stacked Warriors teams, which he has, all right? Specifically in the 2017 and 2018 championships that Steph Curry won with the KD era Warriors. I mean, no question, that's probably the best team of all time. And so, you know, that kind of limits the credibility of a couple of, you know, vast impact you could say Steph had. And so, you know, it's fair to say that Steph Curry was the second best player, or maybe even just by this much, 1A and 1B with Kevin Durant, and I believe he was 1B on those two teams for 2 of his rings. And so his impact on winning at the highest level, you know, for his championship seasons, I think he was the best player on his team in 2 of the 4 championships he won. Now in 2022, he did lead his team as far and away the best player on that team to a finals ring and winning his first finals MVP. That was Steph Curry and a bunch of complementary pieces. I mean, no question, that was a top tier ring as far as I'm concerned. 2015, you could say a similar thing, but either way, you have to say that, you know, Steph Curry, despite being slightly the second best player on his team for 2 of his rings, his impact on winning is great, an all-time great. As far as NBA legends go, no question about it. He played on a stacked team, sure, but so did Magic Johnson. That's my point. The Showtime Lakers are one of the greatest dynasties that the NBA has ever seen, just like the Steph Curry Warriors and the KD Warriors. I mean, the Showtime Lakers had a slew of Hall of Famers. We're talking about Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, 2 top 10 players of all time, and James Worthy, who is another Hall of Fame player. This is a big 3 that dominated the Western Conference for, you know, basically, like I said, Magic Johnson's whole career. Now, as far as where he placed in all of that, I believe Magic was the best player on his team for at least 3 of his rings. All right, so, you know, 3 finals MVPs, but I think it's fair to say that, you know, towards the end of Magic's prime, Kareem was really falling out of his prime. And while Kareem was still a great player during those, you know, years in that period, Magic was the guy. I mean, it was a transfer of the best player during that time, in my opinion, from Kareem to Magic. And so they, you know, both of these guys' teams dominated for almost a decade. They were clearly one of the best teams in the league, probably the best throughout those times, winning, you know, becoming a dynasty. They both had all-time great teams around them, stacked with Hall of Famers, and they both won 4 championships at least, right? Magic won 5, you know, and winning, let's make this clear, winning just isn't about championships, right? It's about, you know, getting your team to championships. It's about carrying your team to a playoffs with injured players around you. It's about all these different things. It's not just championships, impact on winning. It's, you know, floor raising ability. Like I said, it seems to me that they both have exceptional floor raising capabilities. You know, Steph Curry, even now at his age of 34, 35, 36, he's able to take subpar supporting casts to the playoffs. All right. And we've seen that time and time again. But I will say during his peak years, he didn't really need to be the best player on the team some of those times. He didn't really need to carry anything. A similar thing could be said about Magic, but I just do think taking your team to 8 or 9 finals within a 10-year stretch, winning 5 of them, and, you know, as the best player on the team, at least 3 of them, I mean, it's safe to say, I think Magic's floor raising ability and his impact on winning was just a little bit better, right? That's not to knock Curry and say his impact on winning isn't great. I mean, like I said, in 2022, we saw Steph Curry take over the entire playoffs with a supporting cast of good complementary pieces. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Draymond Green's a Hall of Famer, Clay's a Hall of Famer, but they just weren't, you know, all NBA caliber, right? At that time. Andrew Wiggins had a great playoff run. Some of these other guys chipped in, but this was Steph's ring. I mean, no question in 2022. I will say, I generally think it's fair to say that Magic has the slight edge in this regard as far as impact on winning goes, but that doesn't mean that Steph's wasn't great. Like I said, they both played on all-time great teams. And so you can't really say Steph's team was worse than Magic's. You can't really say that in reverse as well. I think they both played on Hall of Fame packed teams and won at least 4 championships. I just think Magic, going to more championships, winning more championships as the best player, I think that factors in for me as far as winning and impact on winning goes on an individual level, but it is a slight margin, like I said. I mean, they both played in great systems as well. I mean, they both had all-time great coaches. Pat Riley and Steve Kerr put them in systems. They were both systematic players that basically were the system, right? They were the systems, but that has to factor in. So it's not like an unfair thing where one player's team was better than the others throughout this time. I think they were pretty evenly, all-time great teams with all-time great players. You could say Magic had a, top 10 player of all time. I don't think Steph has ever played with a top 10 player of all time, and that's fair, but that doesn't really disprove that his teams weren't as great as Magic's teams. It just means consistently there was a player on Magic's team that was a top 10 player of all time, but like Kevin Durant's hovering around, top 10 to top 15 to top 20, right? So, but in that, in that stretch, Kevin Durant was probably the second best player in the world. And so you had 2 top 3 players on the world in the same team. You had Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, 2 top 30, you could say Draymond was top 30 at that time in the league. So I think the impact on winning is very similar, but I just give Magic the slight edge. Now, as far as the individual ability goes, I mean, this is where Steph, in my opinion, takes the cake, right? I'm just going to get that out of the way. I think if you look at these players' skill sets individually, it's hard to compare eras, right? But we're going to have to for this video if we're going to rank these 2 guys next to each other. I think Steph Curry could translate as great as he is to any era, potentially even greater if you put him in the 80s or 90s. I don't know if Magic Johnson would be as great as he was during the entire, 1980s decade as he would be right now. I think Magic Johnson's play style, just given the player that he was, we're not factoring in whether or not he would adapt to this game, which obviously I think all the greats would find their way to adapt and become greats in any era. But if we're just taking the 2 skill sets that these players have demonstrated throughout their careers, I just think Steph's is more translatable to other eras. Steph's impact is similar to Magic's as far as, how dominant they are at the things they're good at. I mean, Steph's the greatest shooter of all time, Magic's best playmaker of all time. And so that's kind of a wash there. Obviously, Steph is the far better scorer, the far more efficient scorer. He can, score on all 3 levels. Magic more of an, interior scorer, drive, post moves, things like this. But Magic's playmaking can translate to any era, no question. I think he could easily be the best playmaker of all time today, probably even better today than he was with the offenses being so spread out. I think you'd see similar things. Magic wasn't a 3-point shooter, but that's not to say he wasn't a shooter. I mean, he had a little bit of a mid-range game. Obviously, his shot is a little bit wonky, but, that's not to discredit Steph's playmaking ability, because in my opinion, Steph is one of the more underrated playmakers in NBA history. We mentioned how he plays in a system, and Steph is not a very ball-dominant player. I mean, he can move off the ball about as good as anyone ever. In my opinion, he is the best off-ball movement player of all time, and so he doesn't need to handle the ball all the time to be effective. That's not so much the case with Magic Johnson. He needs the ball in his hands all the time to run as effectively an offense as he could. And so I think the skill sets, obviously Magic's a much bigger player, and I think that helps him as far as his skill set. He was a really big guy, one of the biggest point guards of all time, 6'9". He was quick too. He wasn't necessarily blazing fast, but he was very quick and agile for his height. Magic, obviously the better rebounder, and I think, they're kind of even defensively. I don't think either of them were great defensively at any point in their careers, but I will say, they both are great at getting into passing lanes, ripping ball handlers, finding their way to the ball. Both steals champions in their careers. I just think at the end of the day, Steph takes the cake easily on the ability and skill set front. I could see the perspective of someone watching this video right now and saying, yeah, all those numbers and career accolades are great. Which one's the better basketball player? Which one's better at basketball? And, while this might seem like kind of a joke or kind of a simplistic view of how to rank players, this is actually a very important point. I mean, in these debates, I think it's actually very important that at some point in time, we have to factor in what these guys can actually do on the basketball floor. All the numbers and achievements are great. Yeah. Which one is better at basketball? And I just think if if you look at the skill sets as a whole, I think Steph's is more conducive to a successful and all-time great style of play that would translate to any decade. I just don't see that as much for Magic. I'm not saying he wouldn't be great in today's era. I'm not saying he wouldn't be able to adapt to today's game and, be just as great as he was. I'm just saying, in my opinion, Steph has a more extensive and translatable and more complete skill set as an offensive player than Magic, but that's not to say that Magic isn't just as impactful offensively, with his GOAT playmaking capabilities. And while Magic wasn't a shooter, let's not act like he wasn't a good scorer. I mean, this guy is a pretty much career, 19 to 20 point per game scorer. In the playoffs, he always elevated. He can score on the mid-range, the post, and, in transition where he was great. Free throw line, he was always a great free throw shooter. So let's not make it like he wasn't a, great scorer. He was for his era. And let's not act like he needed to be a great scorer. I mean, the reason he's the best playmaker of all time is because he's able to generate open looks for his teammates better than anyone else in NBA history. So that obviously would translate with his all-time great basketball IQ and his passing ability and his court vision. But I think there's a case to be made he might be a better scorer in today's league because his size at the point guard position. I mean, he's going to bully his matchups on the interior with his post moves and things like this, and his, driving ability and his finishing ability. He was a good finisher, but I just think Steph wins this by, not a crazy margin, but let me explain something. I think it's a wash between how much of a gap Steph has on Magic in the individual skill set and abilities department as Magic has on the first two sections of the video. So, break it down simply. If Magic's gap in the resumes is like this, and if Magic's gap on individual impact on winning is like this, combined with the resume category, and if Steph's gap for, on-court ability is the same, I think these three categories are a wash, and we're basically back at square one, is what I'm trying to say. If hopefully that makes sense to you guys. But luckily for us, if we're trying to separate them, which one's greater, we do have one more category, folks, and that is level of competition. I personally think level of competition is such an important factor when calculating how much someone's championship rings factor into their GOAT claim, right? When we're talking about rings, we're not talking about 2 rings are equal. I mean, every ring is created differently for every situation. And it's easy for casuals to say that 5 is better than 4 and therefore Magic's better. Obviously, we know that's not true. Level of competition plays into it. Who you beat and who you lose to is very important when discussing how much of a winning player someone is, all right? I think Magic faced a lot of all-time great competition. I mean, he went up against the Celtics dynasty basically his whole career. And if he was going to win a championship, he had to either go through the Celtics in the finals or the 76ers with Dr. J and, later Moses Malone. And so these are 2 all-time great teams. Obviously the Celtics, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, he had to go through those teams if he was going to win a finals most years. And that's, it's fair to say why he lost quite a few of them is because, his competition in the finals was severe. His rivalry with Larry Bird was only a rivalry on the scale that it was, maybe the greatest rivalry in NBA history because their teams were so evenly matched. Magic's team and Larry Bird's team, 2 of the best teams ever. They win at it almost every single year in the finals, creating the Lakers-Celtics rivalry, reigniting it, right? So Magic had, he played in the 80s, which was a very good NBA era, great NBA era, one of the best. As far as league-wide competition, obviously we can say today's is probably a little bit better. Back then there weren't as many teams in the league, only maybe a few threats year to year. I'm not saying Magic, didn't face a lot of competition in the West to get to the finals, but clearly it was a little bit subpar compared to some other eras. I mean, but I think throughout the 80s, the West was maybe a little bit weak compared to today's standards, right? But with Steph Curry, both the Western Conference and his Eastern Conference matchups were all-time great. I mean, if you think about who Steph Curry and the Warriors have to fight through in the Western Conference each year, we're talking about some of the best teams in NBA history that never won a championship, right? The 2012 OKC Thunder, the, James Harden Rockets, those were the biggest comp for Steph Curry, the Rockets. The San Antonio Spurs with Kawhi Leonard. I mean, some of these teams were absolutely dominant in their own right. The Grit and Grind Grizzlies. So many Hall of Famers on all these Western Conference teams. The Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki. Portland Trailblazers, Damian Lillard. There was just so much competition that the Warriors constantly found their way on top of to the, finals. And then we think about who Steph Curry faced in the finals throughout his entire career, basically. Every finals matchup he had was absolutely nuts. I mean, for one, the first 4 finals he played in was against LeBron James, who you could either say is the second or first best player of all time. You know, it was a mountain to beat LeBron James every single season for the Warriors. Basically, other than maybe 2017 and 18, we can, that's a different discussion for a different video. But either way, you had to go through one of the best ever every single season. And that's not to discount Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, and some of these other role players the Cavs had. I mean, these matchups were elite all time. I mean, Cavs only ended up stealing one of them. That was a bad mark on Curry's resume, was his 3-1 blown lead to the Cavs, where he played a little bit subpar, but at the end of the day, you're going against one of the GOATs ever. And so Steph Curry, I think, easily you could say has played in an era with better competition, and he's faced better competition on at the highest level of his success and his failures. Listen, in the finals, I mean, Magic Johnson played against, I think it's safe to say, as good of competition as maybe Steph did as far as the teams he played goes. I mean, Larry Bird Celtics and Dr. J Sixers were some of the best teams ever. He lost to those teams and he beat those teams several times. But as far as like Steph Curry, I mean, just to even get to the finals a lot of times for the Warriors was like almost competing in an NBA finals. I mean, some of these Western Conference finals were insane. Even like the second round was like a crazy feat to get through in that era of the West. And then, to get all the way there and play LeBron James and the Cavs, that's all-time great competition that he beat constantly. I mean, so at the end of the day, I think Steph gets the slight edge on the level of competition that he played against. You could say in 2017 and 18, he didn't really have to be the guy who carries the team. I mean, if you look at the way LeBron performed in those finals and basically only won 1 game out of both of those series, like, it's just crazy that I'm not saying Steph played bad or he didn't play incredible. I'm just saying, you guys know what I'm saying. But my point is, I think Steph gets the slight edge on level of competition. That is the last category, folks. And I will make it clear that, in my opinion, with the context I've laid out, these are very evenly matched careers. I mean, through the logic I just gave, you'd give Steph Curry the slight edge as far as GOAT point guard. And I think by the end of his career, he definitively will be the GOAT point guard. For me, at least, and hopefully for a lot of people, if, what I expect to happen happens, where he has a couple more seasons like he's been having, where, all NBA season, one of the top 10 players in the league type of season, continues this journey as carrying the Warriors to heights that we don't think are possible, with all-time great production still at the age of 36 for, a player of his position. And so if Steph Curry makes a couple more all-NBA teams, if he keeps putting up production like he has been for at least 2 more years, we'll say, the longevity is just so great that you can't really deny it. But I will say, if he wins another ring or even makes another finals, I think he's the GOAT point guard definitively. I might already give him the slight edge. I think you can make a realistic case either way. I kind of go back and forth on it personally. Like, sometimes I think like Magic's clearly a top 10 player, and I don't know if I'd put Steph there personally. But then some other times I'm like, well, I just laid out all the stuff in this video where I think Steph might have the slight edge on all of the context put together. And so it's really hard for me to determine like definitively and take a strong stance on like who is the GOAT point guard. I just think it's so close. I know this is a polarizing issue. I did my best to avoid the toxicness and the polarization and that people constantly do online. I'm trying to do it pretty objective and fair to both sides and really not put any, biases or sway on either way. Hopefully I could provide a lot of context for you guys and maybe form your own conclusion, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this video right now are super like on one side or another, but maybe hopefully throughout the video I gave some points and, some clarification that maybe could, I guess, reevaluate it in general, right? I'm not trying to sway you one way or another. Like I said, I like both of these players. I'm a fan of both of them. And personally, it's just an interesting topic to me because things that are really close, I think as far as like debates go, they deserve a lot of, attention and nuanced analysis. And that's what I like doing on this channel. And so it's just an interesting topic for me. I don't really have a stake in the race either way. I just hope I made you guys think about it in a more critical and maybe a little bit of a different way. I don't know. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. Let me know down in the comment section who you think the point guard GOAT is. Is it Steph Curry? Is it Magic Johnson? If you think it's Magic Johnson, what do you think Steph Curry has to do still left in his career to surpass Magic Johnson? Could it be one more championship? Could it be, like I said, just a couple more years of his dominant play? Or could it be something totally different? If you are a Steph Curry like supporter in this debate, what do you think separates him from Magic Johnson? I'm curious to hear both sides takes on it. Me personally, I lean a little bit more towards Steph, but that, that could change tomorrow. Like I said, it's just so close for me. I know people like to think that it's not close at all, like either either Steph's far and away better or Magic's far and away better. I just think that's kind of super biased. Like, I just don't think you could look at these two careers and say one is drastically better than the other. I think it's really, really close. And so if you guys think it's drastically different, please tell me why in the comments. But other than that, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to see like this become a series on like me breaking down two players' careers in terms of like a heated, discourse across the NBA community, like let's say LeBron versus Jordan, for example, or LeBron versus Kobe, for example, or Curry versus Kobe, or Tim Duncan versus Kobe, like please let me know down in the comments. I think it could be a fun series, but I'm just not sure what you guys will think of it. Either way, hopefully you came away out of this video with some information or some kind of different perspective, and I hope you guys take this into consideration, all the stuff I said. Either way, I'm cool with whatever you guys think. Again, I don't really have a horse in this race. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day today. Make sure you guys leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it. Helps new people find the video. And if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, it would really mean a lot to me. We're on the road to 15K and we're getting close, man. And so I really want you guys to be a part of this NBA journey with me. We upload content on the channel just like this all of the time, like so much. We upload content just like this. I want you guys to be a part of it. So if you guys don't want to miss any more content like this, in-depth analysis of NBA coverage, this is more of a topic that you could make at any time a video on, but usually for the channel, we do like NBA news, current events, whatever's going on in the NBA, the drama, the discourse. We're going to be talking about it in great detail like this. I just love basketball and I'm passionate about it, and I want you guys to join this journey with me of the NBA content grind, and it's just so fun for me. I love doing this every day. I will catch you guys in the next one tomorrow. Please subscribe, like, comment on the video if you guys haven't. Follow my Twitter. I'm pretty active over there. Follow my Twitch. We're going to be streaming 2K content pretty consistently. At least I'm going to try to be. I have been slacking on that, but I will fire up another stream soon, I promise. Other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, night, afternoon, whatever it is, and I will catch you guys in the next one. NBA point guard GOAT. I think it's super close. I think it could go either way. I could hear a case for both sides. I think I lean just a little bit more towards Curry. This is your boy D-Haven. As always, peace.